with that, let me introduce for our first remarks Professor Caroleen Sayej.
Good evening. Thank you, Congressman, and for coming out to have this really important dialogue on Iran. Many of us who study the Middle East and research and write about it, we deal with this democratic puzzle. Why is the region resistant to transitions to democracy? There have been several waves of democratization, the most recent one pretty much starting in the 70s and finishing up somewhere in the mid-1990s. And that transition to democracy encompassed many regions of the world except for the Middle East. And so we're always trying to explain, what's the problem, what's this democratic deficit. And when we're basically looking at this problem, and all we have is really authoritarianism and non-democracies in the region, we tend to then rank the autocracies because we don't have a comparative study with democracies. And when Iran comes up, many people talk about Iran in a slightly different category than they do about some of the monarchies or military regimes in the region. That Iran has better democracy scores than some of the other regimes in the area. Of course, there's a complicated political structure, but when social scientists rank things like civil liberties, free press, rigging of elections, Iran tends to score better than some of the other countries in the region. So the 2009 election comes, and this is the focus of my discussion today. We were all shocked because the results of that election were out of character for basically what we have understood about Iran post-1979. That although it's a theocratic state and it is authoritarian, there hasn't really been a process from 1979 when the revolution began until this past election, June 2009, where the presidential post, where there was actually rigging in the elections. And so what I'd like to do briefly today is talk about the context of this contested presidential post and why society is now contesting state. What is that interplay between state and society? Why did the regime basically co-opt the presidential elections in 2009? What's that basic story to help explain why Iran is now pretty much facing a major legitimacy crisis? It's an internal legitimacy crisis because people in society are part of this now, what we call this green movement, that is not contesting the outcome of the elections because we didn't win, but contesting the outcome of the elections because of the violation of the rule of law and the established codes, really, for presidential politics. So basically, in June 2009, President Ahmadinejad was up for election for a second term. He won initially in 2005. And not unlike other areas, the incumbent has a very good chance statistically of being reelected. However, something was a little bit different in 2009 when Ahmadinejad was up for reelection, running against the now leader of this green movement in Iran, Mossavi, Mir Hussein Mossavi. The difference here is that for the first time in Iranian contemporary history, post-1979 revolution, there were live TV debates. So the candidates, much the way we saw with our election, were debating political issues. They were boasting of these statistical figures, and people started calling in, asking questions, and society was really participating. Moreover, the reformers, as those that were voting for Mossavi were called, were really sending a positive message and basically attacking this radicalism that was coming out of Ahmadinejad. Right? Everybody's aware of his, claims that that we should wipe Israel off the map, and all these other discussions that seem quite threatening, as we'll discuss a little bit later. And it didn't work well with the majority of the population in Iran, that they were not thinking in these radical terms, that basically students were looking to vote for a leader that was more liberal-minded, reform-oriented, somebody that will open up really the communication world for the youth and not push either upward or towards war. It's not by accident that in Iran today, the majority of the population, the youth, were born after the 1979 revolution. Hence, they don't really have a recollection. Were born after the revolution, so they don't really remember the time of the Shah or a lot of the old politics of the Cold War. Rather, they're interested in Facebook and YouTube and all these other things that the youth really around the world are generally interested in. So as the campaigning was going on, and the reformists, these people who wanted a little bit of loosening up of the strict hold that the government had on the political system, more civil liberties, a freer press, were hopeful that they would win, and Ahmadinejad would not win, would not take the second term. Well, the results were in. There was about 85% turnout, as the regime says, and Ahmadinejad purportedly won 63% of the vote, and Mousavi only 34%. And again, people were confused because there was a widespread belief and lots of proof that the elections were rigged, that there were 14 or 15 million extra ballots printed, that there were these mobile booths that we couldn't really account for, that in previous elections the Iranians were able to monitor the vote count, and all of that went out the door. In addition, Mousavi himself was targeted. His website was shut down. Basically, his campaign was raided. So, hence, people took to the streets. And these reformers, largely started spontaneously, but became very organized in contesting the elections. And this green movement, basically now alive and kicking, so to speak, has thousands and thousands of members, people in the United States, internationally, calling for Ahmadinejad to resign, an abolition maybe of the clerical control, freer speech, getting rid of some of these really strict measures. So when you want to understand the outcome, really, of the 2009 elections, for some, it's, okay, out of the blue, more of this rigging of elections, right? We should expect this in Iran as business as usual. However, that's really not true. What I'd like to suggest briefly is that the regime has basically gone through stages, reconfiguration and transformation post-1979 revolution.